Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to U.S. History with Mr. Shaw, the home edition. The baby's sleeping. I've got to be a little quiet. But let's get right to it. And I have a clock that doesn't work behind me, so enjoy that. Welcome to the 1980s, people. A decade of indulgence. Let's get right down to it. Oh, also the decade I was born. We made it. All right, so first thing to talk about, what we left off with Carter. Again, Carter struggled from a couple different issues. The main thing was that he just, the economy was terrible during his presidency. And so the main issue was just that he could not get around the election or the economy. And then when the election of 1980 came around, he just, if the economy's bad when you're president and you're about to be reelected and you're going for reelection, you're not going to win. So that's the big thing. His economic struggles continued. The huge failure in foreign policy made Carter look really inept. Again, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Iran hostage crisis, again, things just piling up for him. And there was also strong opposition from Ted Kennedy for the Democratic nomination. Again, I don't know the relation, but this is a Kennedy of the Kennedy family. And he just barely was able to beat him out. I think that Kennedy had a scandal going on with him. I think that there was I think that he got into this crash and he fled the scene, and then I think a woman died. And anyway, so he never ran for president again after that. So anyway, getting ahead of myself. So the Reagan is the I don't know. I don't really know the best way to put it. He's like the Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of the 1980s. Not in that he was like a strong man, but he was an actor in the 1950s. And 30 years, he decided to get into politics, and 30 years later, boom, he's president. So, I believe he actually might have been governor of California too. So that there's the other Arnold connection. So you're welcome. Again, Reagan creates, or he believes in what's called modern conservatism. Again, I talked about that in the last video about how people were worried about the indulgence of the 60s and 70s. And how we had really lost our way as a country. And so this modern conservatism is, how do we get those American values back? And how do we show that is what we value? Or how do we show what we value? And so he was, the other really big thing for Reagan is he's backed by what's called the moral majority. And so this is a vocab term. And what you need to know is that ministers encouraged Christians to support conservative candidates. And the main reason for that was the stance that the Republicans took, starting with Nixon, that Republicans were going to believe in pro-life. So anyway, that is why Christians started to do that. Also, there's other things too, like in the Bible, it talks about how if he who is in debt is a slave to the debtor or something like that. And so that's the kind of thing that it just. What Democrats were more in favor of, spending and things like that, or big government spending, in tandem with higher taxes. So, but that just didn't really mesh well with the Christians. So anyway, so this is ministers start encouraging Christians to support conservative candidates, and we're going to see the growth of the religious right that continues to this day. They usually talk about them as evangelicals today, though, but again, they still support Republicans, again, because of mostly because of the pro-life. Again, election in 1980. Reagan defeats Carter by a landslide. He wins 51% of the popular vote and 489 electoral votes. Again, that's a huge margin, especially in terms of the Electoral College. So here we go, Ronald Reagan. So here we go. The biggest thing about Reagan is what's called Reaganomics. And he's really the first president and the first Republican president that to really focus on what's called supply side economics, also known as trickle down economics. So like have you ever seen a movie or like a TV show where they're like at a fancy party or something and they have like all these little champagne glasses and they're stacked up in a big pyramid, and they start like pouring, champagne or whatever in the top, and then it starts trickling down to all of it. Like once it starts overflowing from the top and it goes all the way down to the bottom. That's the basic idea of trickle down economics, is they're going to give massive tax cuts to the wealthy, and corporations. So people who are, at the top, like the top, 10% of people, 5 or 10% of people, and they're going to just basically like say, okay, we're going to do a bunch of stuff for you, the top, the wealthiest people in the country. And now what the wealthy people are going to be able to do in turn is they are going to be able to create more jobs. They're going to be able to, I don't know, like expand their businesses, and things like that are going to really start benefiting everybody in America, was the idea. Like lowering their prices too, theoretically. They also are going to, supply side economics also calls for the deregulation of businesses. Again, Republicans have been in favor of that for a while, going back, pretty much, all the way through, I guess, probably even like right after the progressive era in like the 1920s. So the big thing about Reaganomics is that it really helps out the wealthiest Americans. The bad news is that it's never actually been proven to work, and at least not to help the economy. So Reaganomics, you got to remember, from the economic standpoint of the 1970s, where we were so terrible and things were just going so badly. Reaganomics was Reagan's attempt to fix that, and it just didn't work. The economy really didn't improve until, much later into the 1980s. And so that's the biggest thing. Like, you got to remember too that the tax cuts for the wealthy are going to really cut into the revenue for the government. So that'll become relevant later. Well, actually, like right now in our day and age, when we now have like a $20 trillion deficit, or a national debt. So that national debt actually really started to skyrocket under Reagan because of the tax cuts. So anyway, moving on. The other thing that Reagan did was he really kind of, like in the 70s, like with Nixon and Carter, Carter maybe not so much, but like especially with Nixon was trying to really kind of calm things down. And Reagan didn't think that was the way to go. He thought that he liked the idea of kind of peace through strength. Like we would want to, protect our country through having a very powerful military. And that is honestly something that Republicans have maintained to this day. Like Republicans really don't like government spending in general, unless it's on, the military is really one of their own main things that they like to spend money on. So again, Reagan is going to pretty much just start pouring money into the military. He's going to lead to a massive military buildup. And I cannot make this up. This is real. Okay, he starts the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars. Okay, and I don't know why he called it that. Probably because he used to be an actor and he was a movie guy. I don't know. I can't help you. But anyway, this was the idea that weapons that they were trying to create weapons that could intercept and destroy incoming missiles. So basically think of like a satellite that has a giant laser that could like blow a missile out of the sky. Sounds awesome. But and Reagan is going to really start, trying to funnel all that. Reagan and the Republicans that were in Congress are going to try to start funneling all this money, to these things. And it kind of like reignites the Cold War, like a little bit, like the 70s. Again, like I said, things were calming down. But again, like the SALT agreements stalled. He's going to also aid Iraq and Afghanistan against the USSR and Iran. So again, we're kind of back to a Vietnam sort of situation. Maybe Korea would be a little bit better of a comparison. But yeah, so we're kind of back to square one in the Cold War, in the 80s. Okay, so moving on to the election of 1984, the Democrat. This is really not super important, to be honest with you. Other than we have the first female vice presidential candidate. But anyway, you guys. Honestly, I don't really care that you guys get this down. So again, Democrats in 1984 are going to nominate Walter Mondale, and Geraldine Ferraro was his vice presidential candidate. You see them right here, and Reagan. Wow, that's embarrassing. What spelling error? Get out of here. Okay, the Reagan won every state except Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Again, Reagan was supremely popular as president. Again, we're going to talk about one tiny thing, maybe two tiny things that kind of hurt him a little bit. But again, Americans Americans hate taxes. So cutting taxes, good for Reagan. Showing a strong military, a lot of Americans like that. So again, and Reagan was just a very popular figure in general, even before he was president. So anyway, he wins handily in 1984. And so this is the one big thing against him. And so this is called the Iran-Contra affair, and it happened in 1986, the year I was born. All right. So in the background is in Nicaragua, there was a communist government that was supported by Cuba, and in Nicaragua, there were these Contras. They're rebels basically, and so Reagan wanted to support the Contras. And so then Congress knew this, and even though there was I believe in 1986 there was a Republican majority in Congress, Congress outlawed any support to the Contras. They thought it was a terrible idea, and so Reagan hated this. He hated that Congress did this. So what he did is he went to Iran, and the national security at Reagan's advising, the National Security Agency created funds for the Contras by illegally selling weapons to Iran, and they made about $30 million, or at least they sold at least $30 million of weapons, and then they funneled that to the Contras in Nicaragua, again against Congress's strict orders. And so Reagan's administration was implicated, but there was no concrete evidence of his direct involvement. Again, come on, what are you going to do? Again, he is in charge of the NSA. So again, no concrete evidence. However, it's pretty well known that he was guilty there. Because that was what he wanted to do in the first place. So even if it wasn't even if it wasn't like a direct order, like he still kind of bears some responsibility for the NSA doing that, because he is technically the boss of the NSA. Anyway, so that was one kind of big little mark on his presidency. And then the second one is the AIDS crisis. So again, you guys are familiar with with HIV and AIDS. Again, these are again in 1981, doctors are going to track this unique medical condition. Again, they discover acquired immunodeficiency syndrome that is caused by human immunodeficiency virus. Again, this had been rampant in Africa, especially for I don't know. I don't want to lie to you and say that I know the years. I don't. But it was going on for quite a while. So by 1985, AIDS was reported in 51 different countries on 6 continents. And again, it had usually been something that was kind of affecting the LGBTQ community, and that's part of the reason why Reagan didn't speak out against it. Again, he was very staunchly Christian, and even if he wasn't staunchly Christian himself, many of his supporters were, and so they were kind of against gay rights, and again, mostly because of the teachings of the Bible, and so that's why Reagan didn't talk about it, or at least not for a while. So celebrities and medical professionals continually request more government attention and funding. And then the Reagans eventually do speak out again. They eventually do speak out about AIDS, but they speak out against it. rather than trying to create more knowledge about it, or trying to fund more research or something like that. And then by 1990, twice as many Americans have died from AIDS than died in Vietnam. Again, just real, and that's a really quick turnaround, considering they just tracked the unique condition in 1981. And again, it had been going back, even further than that in America, but they finally discovered it in 1981. And real quick, this is here at the top here. This is Rock Hudson, who was probably the most famous person in the 80s to come out as HIV positive, or to announce that he had AIDS. And he was just I don't know who he's like the Zac Efron of, the golden age of Hollywood. And so, and he had actually kept his sexuality a secret, for most of his life. But again, he was gay, and he had contracted AIDS, in the course of his life. But anyway, so the second one here we have is Magic Johnson, and he announced that he had AIDS. I believe it was in right around 89 or 90, maybe even 91. And he is not gay, and he contracted it, throughout his life, and he kind of dispelled the stereotype that had kind of followed AIDS all through the 1980s as being kind of a disease that only gay people got. And so that was there was a lot of really important people that were coming out to talk about what was going on, and this is kind of one of the biggest failures of the Reagans in general, or it is seen as such because of how bad the virus is. All right. Welcome to the gadget age. This is going to be, we're going to moving into the 1980s now, or the 1990s now a little bit, but, the 1980s, we really see a lot of, some of the things that, like that consumerism idea of the 1920s and then again of the 1950s. Technology is just really starting to boom. We talk about the home, the personal computer, with the Macs and then Windows in the 90s. Again, just all kinds of fun stuff. All right. So Reagan's done. After 88, he serves 2 terms. George H.W. Bush was his vice president. And he's going to go in, he's going to go against Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, and Bush is just going to dominate again, kind of riding on the heels of Reagan and that modern conservatism now. So he wins by a really huge landslide. Dukakis got in trouble for, I think he took a picture in a tank. I think that was him, and so people were so worried that he was going to just be a big military guy, and that really just kind of sidelined his presidential campaign. All right, I'm going to talk about the first part of George H.W. Bush here, and I'll finish him up in the 90s. All right, so one of the biggest things for H.W. Bush, sorry about that, was challenging communism. There was in China had started having a lot of problems, with, again, they had communism there for, over 40 years, but the people were really starting to want more, democratic reforms. So in Tiananmen Square, which is, one of the very most famous, I guess I'll call it a riot. It was really more of a demonstration. People were, they were pro-democracy demonstrations, and the Chinese government just crushed them. There was up to 7,000 people killed as they imposed martial law because the people wanted democratic reforms. One of the most famous parts of the Tiananmen Square incident, for lack of a better word, is they call him Tank Man, and it's just this guy who was walking across the street, and these tanks were rolling down, Main Street here, and he kind of stops them, and he even is trying to get into the tank at one point, kind of, and he was never seen again. Nobody even really knows who he was, and he was probably killed for his actions. The solidarity movement, again, is kind of another idea here that you're going to see a lot of countries start moving away from communism. Countries that are in the USSR, the Soviet Union, and they're going to kind of start breaking with Moscow and trying to kind of, maybe not create democracy, but a lot of them are going to start, instituting more democratic reforms. So you're going to see here this is where the Cold War really ends, is when the USSR, especially the parts around it, are just going to kind of start falling apart, kind of like I just mentioned with the Solidarity movement in Poland. Again, Eastern Europe is going to start pushing for more democracy. Gorbachev is again, his nickname was Gorby. I don't know that his nickname was actually Gorby. I'm going to fix that. Fixed it. Again, Gorbachev is he's actually the last, he wasn't the prime minister. I'm losing the name of all of the leaders of the USSR, like what they actually called him. I apologize. But again, for lack of a better word, he was the president. He was the leader, of the USSR, and he just was not as powerful as a lot of the other ones that we've seen, again, especially Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, people like that. And so so Eastern Europe starts pushing for democracy. Gorbachev is going to be denounced, he denounced the use of force to maintain the USSR. And so you're going to see the Berlin Wall come down in November of 1989. Germany, again, that has been divided since since the end of World War II. You're going to see Germany reunited in 1990. Again, they were separated for 45 years. So this is really the beginning of the end for communism. In a lot of ways, though, like Reagan, going back to what I said earlier, Reagan gets a lot of credit for the kind of ending communism and kind of restarting the arms race again in the 80s, because America could do it. We had the money, theoretically we had the money to continue the arms race, but the USSR really didn't. And so when he started talking about the Star Wars initiatives and things like that, the USSR was still trying to compete and they couldn't anymore. And so that was kind of one thing that Reagan really gets remembered for, or at least among historians a lot of times. The next thing, was the end of the Cold War. And by the end of 1991, Eastern Europe was really no longer communist. So again, Poland, Belarus, all of these other places, they were really starting to fall away from communism. The USSR was officially dissolved in Christmas of 1991, and Gorbachev and Bush officially ended the Cold War by signing a treaty together. Okay, 90s, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for hanging out.